Recording.
Okay, awesome.
So welcome back, everybody. We are here again on our weekly guest speaker edition. And this one I'm super excited about. We have here Nathan Rains, who is a wildlife diversity biologist at the Texas Parks and Wildlife. So just kind of a quick little background. And I know Mr. Rains, he'll probably go into a lot more details on this, but kind of ask for a quick little bio. And so he got a Bachelor of Science in Wildlife Biology at Texas A&M, and then he has a Master's of Science in Wildlife Biology from LSU. Go Tide! Just joking. Don't like Tide. But he's also been a wildlife biologist at the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. And then he's been a diversity biologist from 2008 on. So Mr. Rains said he works mostly with threatened, endangered, and species of concern, with the specialty of reptiles, which if you look in the back cage, or in the aquariums back there, I say cages, but the aquariums, you'll see he's got some snakes back there, and he'll probably talk about those snakes as well. But with that said, Mr. Rains, we are excited and happy to have you with us today. As we kind of talked about a little bit before, we talked about kind of what the mission of Mission Possible is. And as Dr. Valencia was saying before, a lot of it is we're designing a park, but the park is also there to support an endangered species that's in North Texas. So I think with that said, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you talk to us about kind of what you're doing and how that relates to what we're doing for our Mission Possible.
Okay, I'll give you just a little background. I wish that we could change. We talked about changing our title. People hear diversity biologists. That diversity is such a kind of catchphrase now with all this going on in the world, but it's really diversity from our perspective means non-game. It's what it means. I don't know where we made that transition many years ago, but we way our wildlife department is kind of assembled. We have most of our staff work with game species because that's such a predominant part of our culture and economy and everything else. So most of our biologists work with deer and turkey and quail and those type of things. But in reality, that only makes up 1% of the wildlife species that are out there. So we have such a huge other realm of wildlife, which is the non-game species. And so that's what I work with. And predominantly we work with threatened or endangered species, or what we call species of concern or species of greatest conservation need. And those are the animals that we really focus on because, once a species becomes listed, as federally endangered or even, state designated endangered or threatened, in some respects ties our hands a little bit, because as you can imagine, when something is a fully endangered species, it has all these rules and legalities that we have to work around. But we really focus on those animals that are kind of on that threshold of almost endangered, because those animals we really have a chance to do some conservation work with. And our goal is to keep stuff off the endangered species list. So that's a success. People don't really hear about those kind of stories, but that's what we really focus our efforts on. So here, I work in the central part of the state. Really, the region that I am responsible for goes from those 3 or 4 counties up on the Red River line around Wichita Falls, all the way down to Del Rio, which is on the Mexico border. So we don't have a lot of endangered species in North Texas. That's probably a good thing. Most of my efforts really, although I live up here, kind of focus more on species that occur out west or down south of our region. And so we have, constantly we have research projects going on. That's really my job, is to facilitate research between our department and then researchers. It's usually universities that partner with us, and we take money, we fund it through these universities to conduct research on these animals, and that's what I kind of do and facilitate and work alongside the different university researchers to study these animals and see what's, what's going on with them, what's their status, what are the threats. That's a kind of a primary focus of research. And what are the threats to species and how do we recover it if that's possible? So probably majority of my work, fortunately, is focused on Texas horn lizards. Y'all remember horny toads? It's always been an animal that's sort of been a passion of mine, but we're now going on our 16th year of a conservation project where we're actually trying to restore those or reintroduce them into the wild. And I don't know if y'all have seen that. We've had a lot of, it's such a iconic popular species that, probably ranked second to white-tailed deer as far as, popularity among people, whether it be rural or urban. And so we get a lot of public interest in that. We've had a lot of TV shows and radio and newspaper, a lot of publicity on that project. And so we're still putting an immense effort in to try to see if that's even possible. We don't know if that is yet or not, but that's our goal. So those are some of the projects. I mean, I can go into some of the other species, but what can I answer that be specific to what would help y'all?
So one of the first questions that were asked, and they're just texting me, but is it the same thing as the horned frogs for TCU?
It is, in fact,
Okay,
it's a horned lizard is the actual term because there's actually there's about 13 species of horned lizards, but the one that's horny toad that everybody knows is the Texas horned lizard. It's the one that occurred historically through the whole state, and now that it doesn't anymore. Its range has declined significantly. You really have to go to West Texas to find them. So it's a species that was common in the 70s and 80s, and now it's really been extirpated or removed from much of the state. So now that whole horned frog thing came about when I guess TCU was looking for a mascot. They thought horned lizard was just not I don't know, palatable enough. So they changed it to horned frog, but they've never really, to my knowledge, been called that before, but it just sounded better. So it's just kind of another common name for that species. The horned lizard, horned frog, horned toad, it's all the same thing.
okay, awesome. So one of the questions that we have is, why are they not in the area anymore? Is it because of urbanization, buildings are coming in, natural spaces are going out? What was the reason that you have researched?
That's a great question. And really that's a question that kind of applies to any species that we want to talk about, because when we look at what's happened that has caused a decline in any species that's rare declining, it's really habitat loss. And whether that habitat loss is because of urbanization, which for people every year in Texas, right? We have a place for people to live and to have a house and to shop and all that kind of thing. So urbanization is increasing. We've also transitioned a lot of habitat that was, habitat that they needed into things like agriculture or livestock. Transitioning native habitats, native prairies, those type of things into hay fields and what have you, or agricultural fields. So we've either lost habitat or we've changed habitat to a point where they just can't live there anymore. And one kind of common denominator with most threatened or endangered species that are kind of habitat specialists. So they need certain types of habitats to live in. On the other end of that spectrum would be things that are kind of habitat generalists, like raccoons and deer, possums, things that you see all over cities, so they can adapt pretty quickly to changing habitats or urbanization or whatever. But most endangered species are kind of specialists, so that once you remove that habitat, they just can't survive. Horned lizards are a good example because they have to have native prairie grasses to live in. They need it, and native prairie grasses have a lot of bare ground. That's just the way those grasses grow. You get clumps of grass, then bare ground. But when that transitions into like hay fields for livestock or whatever, they just can't survive in that habitat. They also, like with horned lizards, 99% of their diet is harvester ants or red ants. Those big ants make big old mounds out in the wild. Well, for many, many years, people poison those out. they just killed ants, for whatever reason, until they kind of attacked the ants until fire ants showed up, and they realized there's something worse than native ants. We got fire ants, so they kind of took the pressure off the native ants. But when we removed their food source, they just can't survive. So habitat loss is by far the key ingredient in any kind of decline of animal species.
So what would you recommend? So part of this project is they have, when they design the park, they need to design a habitat that'll help support what that particular species is. So what are some tips that you would give students where, I mean, if just say if you had a blank slate where you can go through and we'll give you 20 acres and you can unlimited budget, this is what you need to do. If you're going to set up a habitat, what would be some things to think about based on, let's say if you were doing the horned lizard? I know I've seen a few projects coming in with is it the golden cheek warbler?
Mhm.
That's been a few popular, and there's another one that was some type of turtle. I don't remember what it was. I remember seeing the picture of it, but when they got to go through and design this habitat in this park, what would be some things to consider with that design to help support that animal and help it flourish?
Well, the first thing I do is just you need to restore that habitat, either restore it or reconstruct it to native habitat. Most species just can't survive in cultivated type habitats, or like city parks. They have non-native trees, non-native plants, Bermuda grass fields. So if wildlife is the principal focus, you need to restore that to some type of native state. And fortunately, there's resources for that. We go to the Soil Conservation Service and get books on soil types and what type of native plants historically grew on those soil types, and then we can plant it back to a native state. So that would be really the first and only thing I would try to do, is just restore it to a native habitat that was historic for that area itself. And we have plenty of resources that can show you that, whether it be online or in print. There's lots of resources to tell us, what this land should have looked like in that specific area long ago, and then we can get animals to hopefully come back.
So one of the questions is, if we're trying to do a conservation and at the same time have humans be able to be part of that area, can the two survive? Can those two things survive? Or when we design, would you say the conservation is in one area fenced and then the humans in another area?
They can, I think there's a balance there that can be achieved. It's always a little bit give and take. There's a small percentage of species that probably, don't do well with, human habitation or human presence at all. But a lot of other animals can tolerate it to some extent. So I would just try to achieve that balance of enough habitat that's native and meets all their needs. And then you can work in some walking trails and some other things to allow for humans to enjoy that. If we don't get to enjoy it all, it's kind of to some degree defeats the purpose of all that effort. Really, we can't experience it on some level. So there's a balance there that you can achieve. That as you get smaller acreages, it obviously becomes more of a challenge. There's less land to work with, there's less places for animals to get away from people or whatever and hide. But it can be done.
So do you work on you were mentioning that you'll have radio programs and things where trying to get the word out about like the horned frogs or horned lizard. Sorry, make sure I'm using them.
Either way, you're right.
But what would be some advice? Because what's going to happen with this project from the student side, it's almost like a Shark Tank type of deal. So the next round, the kids are going to come together and they're going to pitch their idea to about 3 or 4 judges as a panel to push the idea of the conservation. And then from there, they're going to go and take it to like the final round of judges. So what would be some tips for students because they have a limited amount of time to really pitch their idea and or why this is important to this panel of judges? It's probably an awful question. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just trying to think how to best answer. I mean, just, when, there's so many avenues now to, get the word out about the project, and we never had social media 20 years ago, so, like with the horn lizards, whenever we have a release, we release babies now to the adults. We'll put it out there on social media, we'll put it out on our approximately Facebook page and Twitter and all that, and then generally, since it's such a popular species, we'll get, news stations and radio and TV or newspapers, they'll all kind of jump on board and want to be a part of that. So it's pretty easy to get the word out. When we do research, generally we have a species that we're interested in, that we're concerned about, that we solicit proposals. So we send out what's called RFP, a request for proposal, and universities and researchers and what have you will send us a written proposal about, what we can have. They'll have to mold their objectives to our goals. So we have what we want to see in this research, and they'll develop a project with, objectives, results, how they're going to publish those results at the end, all those kind of things. So they send that to us, and we select the one that best matches our research needs. So we could probably kind of do a similar path and put together a proposal for this project, whether it be written or do kind of a cool video or whatever. It just best meets the kind of the objectives of that project, what we want to look like when it's all said and done. So how are we going to get there? That's kind of the way I think I would approach it, if that makes sense.
We have Ms. Rodriguez's class. We have some students that are right there in the background.
All right.
I'm shy to ask, but if you guys can say hi.
You want to say hi?
Hello.
And so they have some questions they want to ask. Go ahead, Ms. Rodriguez.
So they wanted me to, can you hear okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So they just wanted me to ask, we had a question about your role in with cities. Does the Texas Parks and Wildlife, let's say a city wants to build an area that has natural habitats or bringing a green space kind of area, do you work with cities to make sure that as a resource for them to develop that into an area that would be viable for animals and humans?
Great question. I don't personally do that, but we have staff that do that very thing. They're called urban biologists. So all of our big urban centers, Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio, not sure where else, but they have a biologist that's their primary role, is to work with those urban city planners, developers, all those kind of things, to develop projects just like that. That they come to us and we give our input on how to best do this project that would be most beneficial to wildlife, or at least cause the least harm for wildlife, or whatever kind of direction it's going. But yes, we have staff to do that very thing.
I think that's about it for their questions. You've done a really good job of asking and answering questions so far. Thanks.
So I have a question. So how do you determine, let's say you have maybe 100 horned frogs or something like that, where you're going to reintroduce out into this space? How do you determine like how much food's needed, how much water, how much supplies, things like that to have available for those species that you're going to reintroduce? Like, what do you kind of use to evaluate?
Right. It depends on, obviously, on the species, but we do, before there's any kind of reintroduction, there'd be a lot of research that kind of precedes that. So we would do habitat evaluation. So where we release the horned lizard right now is down on one side. It's down in the hill country. It's on one of our wildlife management areas. We looked at the food availability, were there that necessary ants there? Were there enough ants? Was the habitat right with the right kind of grasses? Was it the other components they needed? So we did a pretty extensive habitat assessment before, we ever released any animals. And that's kind of just a golden rule for any kind of reintroduction.
So what's been probably the most rewarding part of what your job is?
It's a good question. I enjoy all of the research. I've always been kind of inclined to research in general. I love the whole process of studying animals. It's no different than when I was in high school or college. It's just a learning process. It's so much fun. I really enjoy getting out in the field. A lot of times I facilitate research, so I'm kind of the middleman between the Texas Parks and Wildlife and the actual people doing the research, but I get to get out in the field quite a bit with them. And that's the most exciting part. It's just being a part of the data collection and seeing animals I've never seen before. The rewarding part is seeing, when we have some success or, whether it be introduction or learning about a species, learning that it's, not as endangered or as rare as we thought it was. So just the whole learning process is the most fun to me.
Now, what is behind you? What do you have in those aquariums there?
Whereas we have, so the top left for me, right there is it's a Western hognose snake. It's an animal that we did, had a recent research project with UT Arlington looking at genetics of that animal, because there were several, what we originally had is different species of Western hognose snake. And what we found out through the genetics is that really there's just one species. So the importance of that is we had these populations that we were afraid were declining and risk local extinctions. But when we found out that really that's just one kind of large population of the same species, it kind of changes our conservation goals, whether we don't need to be quite as concerned. So that was a pretty neat project. The other three cages are all king snakes that we only have 5 species in the state, and I had all 5 in my office. Unfortunately, one of my species passed away this winter. So I take those a lot to schools and programs and stuff, because they're real kind of gregarious, docile snakes that are easy for kids to hold and stuff. But pretty neat animals. Pink snakes are not all species, but most of them are snake-eating species, and they're immune to snake venom. So they eat lots of rattlesnakes and copperheads and cottonmouths, those type of things, and they're completely immune to their venom. They're kind of neat. And then the other case, there's some tiger salamanders, which kind of the largest salamander amphibian that we have really in the country. So they're pretty cool little animals.
How big are they?
They are almost a foot long.
Oh, wow.
I can grab one out here in a minute. They're slimy. They're not the only amphibian that you can actually kind of keep in captivity, because other species, they will take a lot of effort and time and care, more care than I can provide. These are pretty easy.
I have a question that came in, and I'm not sure if that was already asked by you, Mr. Smith, since I had to leave for a second. But they wanted to know, if having humans around the habitat of the whooping crane negatively affects them.
That's a good question, because that's not a species I've really worked with. I think they're fairly tolerant of people to some degree. I'm sure they have since it's been such a critically and kind of threatened species and highly imperiled, I'm sure I think the laws are pretty strict on how close people can get to them. There's been a few instances over the years where I think poachers have killed a few of them, and I think that's a pretty serious offense because it's such a critically endangered species. So I don't know a lot about them. They they travel through our state and they spend part of the time every year down the Texas coast, and they travel all the way back up to, I think, Canada. And a lot of times they'll travel with sandhill cranes, which is a similar species that's, quite common. But I think they're semi-tolerant of people, but I don't know a whole lot about that animal.
We have another question that said, why did you go into this field? Is it because you lived around these kind of animals and you started seeing them that were gone, or why did you get into this field of work?
I was when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I knew this is what I wanted to be, just like everybody kind of has dreams of being something when they're young. Well, my vision never really wavered, so that's what I wanted to be when I was, at elementary school, and all I ever wanted to do. I was I had a father and a grandfather that took me outdoors a lot, so I did a lot of hunting, fishing, just exploring, all those type of things. So I always had a fascination with wildlife, and I had a kind of fascination with science, so that kind of went together. And then for whatever reason, I just had an interest in reptiles as a kid, so kind of paid off later, because even among our wildlife professionals, not that many of them still want to work with reptiles. Still pretty low on the popularity poll. So when you're kind of a weirdo like me that likes them, you find yourself a place pretty easy to get involved with stuff that nobody else wants to do.
So on a follow-up to that, if someone wanted to go into this field, because we do have elementary students and we have some that are high school, that sort of thing, what would be some advice? What would be some things that you would say if they wanted to go this direction?
Well, there's two things you just have to get. One is, it's education and experience. You've got to have, when we hire people, one of the qualifications, they have a degree in some type of wildlife or biology or ecology or some type of natural resource related field. And then beyond that, the people that get hired are the ones with the most experience. So just, we utilize lots of volunteers in our various things we do. We have interns and summer seasonal type jobs, all those type of things. So just getting experience. We're always looking for people that are just interested and willing to get out in the mud, do some fun stuff with it. So just experience and education is the two things you've got to have to get in a field like this.
Well, what would be some things, let's say, you talk about the volunteering. What are some things that kids can do to actively volunteer?
Now, we use volunteers in a whole host of different things. We, in the fall, we go out and do things like spotlight deer surveys, where we, every year, all of our staff conduct deer census, and we use those. That data gets, then utilized as we set, things like deer seasons and harvest limits, all those type of things. So we go out and do surveys for deer, and it's always done at night with spotlights. So that's kind of an interesting thing to do. We have other opportunities, like when deer season starts, our biologists go out to wherever hunters are bringing in deer, usually at the deer processing plants and stuff, and we collect data from those animals, whether it be age, antler measurements. We collect tissue for disease studies and those type of things. And then, myself, I get out in the summers and do things like horned lizard surveys, trying to just assess population, so we can, people can tag along for stuff like that.
So how do they find these different events or opportunities? Is there?
That's where you take a little bit of initiative. They just got to contact their, Parks and Wildlife staff that's in their area. You get on, you can get on our website and find the biologist for your area. There's a whole page that says find a biologist, and they can do that. Same thing if they want to, tag along with like game wardens, or we have a whole, I'm on the wildlife side, but we have state parks, we have fisheries. We've got these different departments or branches of Texas Parks and Wildlife that they get involved in. It's just, that's what takes just some initiative just to track those people down, because we use volunteers, but we don't really go out and we're not the ones that are knocking on people's door. They need to kind of come to us and show some initiative, and that's the people that we remember down the road when we're trying to hire people.
I think we have one last question that came in, and let me read it correctly, because it was not written correctly, but I'm hoping that what they're trying to say is, so definitely as a conservationist, you would not recommend cages for some of these animals, even if you put native plants and flowers and food inside a cage. The conservation, it's more of a field, or how? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on, I guess, the situation. Like most, plants and things, we want to keep them in their native environments. Most animals, we want to keep in their native environments. Depends on how, imperiled an animal or how rare it is. Like with certain species, like, there's an animal called the black-footed ferret. We don't have it in Texas, but, it was a ferret, and a ferret, the only ferret that we have in North America. They thought they were completely extinct. They only, they live in prairie dog towns and prairie dog colonies, so that's what they eat. Well, they thought for many, many years they were extinct until like the 1960s or 70s. They actually found a little family living in, I think it was Wyoming. I'm not positive. So they had to bring those into captivity and build a population back to reintroduce. So there are instances where we have to bring stuff into captivity. Our horn lizards that we work with, we breed those in captivity. We tried for years to reintroduce adults where we just catch them and take them to a new environment, let them go. Just didn't have much success with that. So now we breed them in captivity and we let the babies go. So there's instances where we do stuff in cages, I guess you could call it, but for the most part, things are better off left on their own. We try to remove threats and we try to improve habitat so they'll kind of just restore themselves.
Okay, so whenever designing in one of these conservation areas, and I guess this is a group asking, they have designed something that's inside where there's aquariums or cages, and then they have some areas outside. Is that kind of something that you have seen in your area of work?
Yeah, I've seen, no, that's not necessarily do myself, but I've seen like certain cities have nature centers where they've got like an education type building where they go in and do classroom stuff and education. And in there, they usually have some cages set up with, animals and fish and plants kind of on display to educate people. But then they go out and they've got, so many acres of that native habitat for people to actually see and what they're actually doing, habitat improvement, habitat conservation. So yeah, I've seen kind of both.
Okay, thank you.
We have any more questions? Mr. Rodriguez, any?
We're good, thank you.
I think that we are definitely good, and we want to thank Mr. Nathan Raines for coming today and introducing us into a whole new world of conservation. As you guys, the students, are continuing to engineer and design your conservation areas, I want you to continue to keep this in mind, the talks that we had today, so that it could enhance all of your designs. Mr. Smith, you have something else to say to the students?
No, I think this is like what you're saying at the beginning. Everything we've been doing up to this point has been on the guest speakers, has been from the engineering kind of design of everything. Well, a major part of this project too is the conservation side of it as well, with the animals or the plants or both, whichever direction you're going. So I think it was awesome to get Mr. Raines in here to kind of talk about his perspective. And when I was reaching out to everybody, and Mr. Raines is 100% correct on find a biologist, because that's what I was doing. I was going through and reaching out to as many as I possibly could. But just having that perspective and what his area was, I was super excited to get him on here because he's got that animal and that background and that side of it. So super pumped to get that that perspective and that side of it. So yes, sir, Mr. Raines, we are definitely super excited that you're able to meet up with us, and we appreciate you jumping on with us.
I'm glad to help, and if they have questions afterwards, just compile them and email them to me, and I'll help however I can. I'm glad to be a part of something like this.
Yes, sir. We
Definitely.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Anytime, glad to.
All right, well, I'm gonna stop the recording here.